In the summer of 1981, the Skylab Carousel at the Hamburg Cathedral Fair was all about fun. The ride would lift riders up into the air, and their screams of glee could be heard from all over the fairground. That is, until a deadly mistake turned happiness into tragedy. A crane arm left in the way of the rising gondolas led to a terrible crash. It ripped the safety bars off the gondolas and threw people onto the hard ground below. 7 people died, and another 15 were severely injured. Happy moments were suddenly stained with the blood of innocents, and when the dust settled and the dead mourned, angry questions surfaced. How did this happen? Was it the fault of the operators, or was there something more sinister going on behind the scenes? And importantly, what impact did this tragedy have on amusement parks everywhere? Today, we dig into the painful story that turned a historic fair into a place of terrible loss. The Hamburg Cathedral Fair is more than just a fair. It's a visible monument of happiness, togetherness, and tradition in German culture. Covering a long history that goes back to the 14th century, the Hamburg Cathedral Fair, also known simply as Dom, has been a center of fun for hundreds of years. Located at the Heiligengeistfeld Fairground in the middle of Hamburg, Dom happens 3 times a year. It's a place that has something for everyone, no matter the season. It's a massive event, attracting around 10 million people every year, making it Germany's biggest and oldest fair. But what's also amazing is how important it is to German life. It's a people's festival, where you can find more than just rides and games. There are also beer festivals and community events. Street performers make things even more fun, entertaining people of all ages with their juggling and dancing. In the evening, the sky lit up, not just from the bright lights of the rides, but also from the amazing fireworks every Friday night. These fireworks are more than just a show. They're a bright celebration that can be seen over most of the city, showing the happiness and unity that Dom stands for. As the laughter and cheers mixed in the warm summer air, people moved towards 2 exciting rides that promised to make their hearts race: Skylab and Catapult. Both attractions were tall examples of human cleverness and the pure joy of going against gravity, even if just for a little while. Skylab was hard to miss. A big wheel with seats went high over the fair, like a signal for fun. As the wheel turned, it lifted riders higher and higher, giving them a great view of the busy fair below. Just being up there, high off the ground, felt like you could touch the sky. The wheel turned fast enough to make you feel joyful, but not so fast that it scared away young people or those easily frightened. On the other side of the fairground was Catapult, a ride that made the word excitement mean something new. You'd be strapped into a car that launched into the air with the force of a slingshot, going around in a full circle before doing it all over again. The ride was so quick and energetic that riders felt alive long after they'd taken off their safety belts. Both of these amazing rides were run by a man whose personality was as bright as the flashing lights on Skylab and Catapult. Norbert Witte was the name everyone knew for these exciting experiences. Dressed in colorful clothes that fit the fair's mood, Witte knew how to entertain. He welcomed everyone with a big smile and the kind of excitement that made you happy just to be there. Over the years, his charm and lively behavior earned him several nicknames, like Norbert the Showstopper and King of Showman. Norbert was more than just a guy turning switches and pushing buttons. He was the heart of these rides. He'd wave to the kids as they went up on Skylab, shout happy words to people who were nervous about riding Catapult, and even make funny announcements to keep everyone entertained. For Norbert, the fair wasn't just a job, it was what he loved to do. People could tell he really cared about making their rides as exciting as possible, and they loved him for it. Witte was so charming that even people who didn't usually like rides would find themselves watching him work, drawn in by his energy and love for what he did. That unforgettable summer of 1981 was no different. Norbert Witte was in his element, running Skylab and Catapult with the energy and style only he could bring. It was another day of fun in the sun and exciting rides, and everyone was enjoying it, just like they always had at the Hamburg Cathedral Fair. No one could have known that the joy of that perfect day would soon change to something straight out of a nightmare. Yet for that moment, as the sun shone brightly and laughter filled the air, the fair stayed what it had always been, a place of happiness, togetherness, and fun that made you feel fantastic. The rides turned, the people cheered, and Norbert Witte, the charming man in charge, made sure it was a day no one would ever forget, and they never did. Earlier that day, the catapult ride was acting up, a broken loop part that he couldn't overlook. Night had come, and the area around Catapult was covered in darkness, closed off for quick fixes. Norbert and a hard-working employee were busy fixing yet another broken gear. On the other side of the fair, people were getting in line for what would be the last ride of the night on Skylab. Norbert, focused on his fixes, didn't notice what was about to happen. He had lifted a heavy engine part into place with a truck-mounted crane, leaving the crane's arm sticking out. He thought it was far enough from the tall Skylab, a big mistake. At exactly 12:55 a.m., operator Hilda T. started the ride on Skylab. The wheels started to go up, the seats filling with excited riders, their faces lit up by the lights of the carnival below. As the gondolas went up, a sad song, Massachusetts, by the Bee Gees played over the speakers. Its notes seemed creepy, given what was about to happen. The gondolas were going up, but so was the crane's arm. And then it happened. The ascending gondolas hit the crane arm that was sticking out. The crash was terrible, cutting through the gondolas like they were made of paper. Pieces of glass and metal flew everywhere, hurting those who were watching from below. Passengers were thrown out, some falling as much as 50 feet onto the concrete below. In the control booth, Hilda T. realized the terrible thing happening and hit the emergency stop button. But it was too late. A scary silence fell over the fairground, soon replaced by screams and cries of pain and shock. Among the riders was Vincenzo Maniscalco, who had come to pick up his wife from her job at the Cathedral Bakery. He had noticed the crane's arm too late and had prepared himself just as the crash happened. He felt like a bomb had gone off and was able to hold on, barely avoiding worse injuries. That night, the Hamburg Cathedral Fair turned into an unforgettable disaster, a creepy scene that broke the magic the fair had held for generations of visitors. 7 lives were lost, many were hurt, and the whole community was shocked. For a moment, among the loud noise of emergency sirens and upset voices, Norbert Witte stood still, his eyes looking over the disaster. The man who had spent his life making people happy had accidentally caused a tragedy. The piercing wail of sirens brought him back to reality. First responders swarmed the site as quickly as possible. Firefighters, paramedics, and police officers jumped into action, prioritizing the most critically injured. Ambulances began to fill, doors slamming shut, before racing off toward nearby hospitals, their sirens splitting the night air. Emergency personnel spread blankets on the ground for triage, attending to those who were hurt but still standing, faces contorted in shock or pain. The crowd, those who had been laughing and screaming in delight just moments ago, were now crying out for different reasons. Some were frantically searching for loved ones, shouting names into the night. Others stood still, as if frozen, unable to process what they had just witnessed. A few tried to help, offering bottles of water or comforting words to those waiting for medical attention. But the air was thick with a shared disbelief and a communal heartbreak that no one could escape. Norbert Witte felt his knees buckle. The weight of the disaster was too much for him to bear. He had spent his life dedicated to making those who rode his fair rides happy, and now the same hands that had waved kind greetings to strangers had wrought devastation. He collapsed onto the cold, hard ground, his body convulsing in sobs. The realization that his mistake had cost lives was a burden too great, and for the first time in his colorful career, the king of Showman felt like anything but royalty. Paramedics rushed to him, checking his vitals and helping him onto a stretcher. In what was the happiest place on earth for some people, this terrible tragedy unfolded, leaving in its wake a community scarred but bound together, forced to confront the fragility of life itself. Months after the tragedy that turned a fairground into a morgue, Norbert Witte found himself in a place far removed from the dazzling lights and laughter of his former life, a courtroom. Instead of the festive atmosphere he was used to, he was surrounded by stern faces and legal proceedings. He faced charges of negligent homicide and negligent bodily harm. Dressed in a suit instead of his flamboyant showman outfits, Witte listened as the prosecution laid out the series of unfortunate events leading up to the tragedy. It was damning. The extended crane jib, the failure to coordinate repair work, and the following horrific sequence. The room felt heavy, like you could reach out and touch the tension in the air. And while Witte had once been the maestro of merriment, he was now the protagonist in a real-life drama of the gravest sort. When it came time for the sentencing, murmurs filled the courtroom. The verdict, 1 year of probation, no jail time. A wave of disbelief washed over the room. The sentence seemed lenient considering 7 people had lost their lives and many more were scarred physically and emotionally. Hadn't he heard the charges against him? Negligent homicide? People were dead because of the decisions he had made. The room buzzed with outrage, with reporters frantically jotting down notes for the storm of news stories that would soon follow. The court itself anticipated the public outcry. As if justifying the sentencing, the judge spoke about the difficulty of the case, mentioning that while Witte was negligent, his actions were not intentionally malicious. The judge admitted that Witte had not wanted this outcome. He had not plotted for it. He had been careless and absent-minded. Still, the justification didn't sit well with many. As for Norbert Witte, he appeared broken. Gone were the days of dazzling audiences with spectacular rides and jaw-dropping attractions. His once thriving career in the amusement park industry had crumbled, and his reputation lay in ruins. In the weeks that followed, debates raged on social media and news platforms about the appropriateness of Witte's sentence. Many believed the justice system had failed, that a man responsible for such a tragedy should face more severe consequences. The controversy prompted a deeper look into safety standards in the amusement park industry, pushing many to question how such an oversight could happen in the first place. For the community, the ripple effects of the tragedy lingered long after the fairground rides came to a halt. Vincenzo Maniscalco was just one face among the many deeply affected. He had described the nightmarish experience as feeling like a bomb explosion, and he wasn't alone in carrying that terror. Every time he closed his eyes, the scent of burning metal and the screams replayed in his mind, as vivid as if it had just happened. Vincenzo could no longer pass an amusement park without a shiver crawling up his spine. What had once been a source of innocent joy was now a source of unimaginable trauma. It wasn't just the physical injuries that haunted survivors and the victims' families. The emotional and psychological scars were just as debilitating. Parents lost children, children lost parents, and everyone lost a sense of security and trust in a space that was supposed to embody fun and freedom. In Germany, the government was swift to set up a regulatory body focused solely on amusement park safety. New protocols were instituted, mandating multiple layers of checks and third-party inspections. The changes in Germany spurred a ripple effect, leading to revised safety standards worldwide. The US and several European countries also overhauled their safety guidelines, adopting more stringent rules that required rides to be inspected more frequently and rigorously. This international tightening of regulations led to a noticeable drop in accidents in subsequent years, yet the hard-earned safety came at the steep cost of lives lost and forever altered. It was a painful reminder that the margin for error was painfully narrow, even in spaces designed for carefree joy. Still, the tragedy also instigated a culture of caution that was long overdue, amplifying the importance of safety over spectacle. While the new regulations gave the public a semblance of assurance, they also served as an enduring memorial to the victims, both living and dead, of the Hamburg tragedy. Their suffering was not in vain, but had catalyzed a crucial conversation around safety, responsibility, and accountability in public spaces designed for mass entertainment. But what became of the individuals most affected by the calamity, like Norbert Witte? After the conviction, his life took a 180-degree turn. Having been found guilty of negligent homicide and bodily harm, Witte no longer had a show to run or a crowd to captivate. But here's the thing. Norbert Witte didn't let his story end in shame and regret. He couldn't reverse time, but he could propel forward with a renewed mission. He became an evangelist of sorts, not preaching the gospel of thrills and laughter, but speaking on the holy text of safety regulations and oversight. Norbert dedicated his life to overhauling safety standards, lobbying not just in Germany, but across borders. You see, his campaign had a personal touch that no governmental body could match. He could look people in the eye and say, "I know what happens when we cut corners, when we get complacent. Let's not let it happen again." That's something you don't forget, something you can't ignore. For Norbert, this became his new stage, a place where he performed not for applause, but for the nods of understanding, the commitment to do better. As for Vincenzo Maniscalco, the emotional roller coaster following the tragedy was a ride he never chose to board. But, like Witte, Vincenzo found that the only way to make sense of the inexplicable was to transform his suffering into something, dare we say, useful. Haunted by the images of that fateful day, Vincenzo wasn't just going to sit and try to forget. No, he channeled those vivid flashbacks into advocacy. He became a walking, talking reminder of what's at stake when you flip that switch and the ride begins. Each scar he bore became a punctuation mark in his impassioned speeches, urging for stricter regulations. You know, it's easy to talk about raising awareness, but Vincenzo became awareness incarnate. He started collaborating with Witte. Yes, you heard that right. Two men, seemingly from opposite corners of this tragedy, united by a common grief and a common goal: make amusement parks safe again. If you had told him years ago that he'd be teaming up with the man indirectly responsible for his nightmares, he would have called you crazy. But when he met Norbert, he didn't see an enemy. He saw another broken soul trying to mend a world they'd both torn apart in different ways. Their joint initiatives became more than just a tribute to the victims. It was a message to the world, etched not in gravestones, but in safety guidelines, heartfelt speeches, and real changes. That while they couldn't bring back those lost, they'd do everything in their power to protect those still laughing, still screaming, still living. So you see, the brightest light sometimes comes out of the darkest corners of life. Vincenzo and Norbert, scarred but not defeated, remind us all that even when joy turns to sorrow, there's a chance for redemption. A chance to say, yes, something terrible happened, but that's not where this story ends.